In chapter 26 of the book of Jeremiah, and since, my dear brethren, we are like somewhere in the half of this book, which is good, we're making good progress. We talked today that we'll have to make another pause sometimes as we approach the Passover next calendar year, and there is a feeling that Beatitudes would be a very good preparation for the next year's Passover. So chapter 26, in the beginning, verse 1 of the reign of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, the word came from the Lord saying, now please, the time here is very important, you see. Josiah, the righteous king, the last righteous king on the throne of David, died when the Egyptian army under the Pharaoh Necho passed through the Judea, that is in 609 before Christ. For 3 months, Josiah's son Jehoiakim was put on the throne of David, and this is after beginning of the power of Babylon, meaning that the Babylon was the rising star right there, right then. And it was now a new power looming on the horizon, the power that will eventually destroy Jerusalem and the kingdom of Judah. Thus says the Lord, verse 2, stand in the court of the Lord's house and speak to all the cities of Judah, which come to worship in the Lord's house, all the words that I command you to speak to them. Do not diminish a word. Now this is just after the good reign of Josiah, when Jeremiah got it easy. He had an experience under Josiah. Now look what happens, it is a series of kings that were now rotten after Josiah's reign ended. And God tells Jeremiah what to say. And he says to Jeremiah, even prophets would lessen or diminish his words, God's words. And Jeremiah was warned not to. Verse 3, perhaps everyone will listen and turn from his evil way, that I may relent concerning the calamity which I purpose to bring on them because of the evil of their doings. And you shall say to them, thus says the Lord, if you will not listen to me, to walk in my law, which I have set before you, to heed the words of my servants, the prophets whom I sent to you, both rising up early and sending them, but you have not heeded, then I'll make this house like Shiloh, and will make this city a curse to all the nations of the earth. So in other words, if they will hearken God's words, they'll hearken to God's precepts, what happened to Shiloh was going to also happen to Jerusalem if they will not. Because what happened to Shiloh? Well, Shiloh was obliterated. Shiloh was the place where the Philistines destroyed the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle in the days of Judges. You might remember that even King David, one part of his life, he spent in Shiloh. So Shiloh was the place, like the center of worship, and in the days of Judges and Philistines, they managed to destroy the place and destroy the Ark of the Covenant, and also to destroy the tabernacle. Verse 7, so the priests and the prophets and all the people heard Jeremiah speaking these words in the house of the Lord. Now it happened, when Jeremiah had made an end of speaking all that the Lord had commanded him to speak to all the people, that the priests and the prophets and all the people seized him, saying, you'll surely die. You see, people wanted to kill him. Why? Well, because they could not believe that the temple that had been there for 424 years, 3 months and 8 days could be destroyed. Now listen carefully, brethren, to the train of thought. Verse 8 says, this is very interesting to start with. Where was the problem? To start with the problem was, listen carefully, among the priests and the prophets who stirred up the people. That is where it began. And then in verse 10, the political leaders, the princes of Judah, heard it. We're going to verse 9 first. Why have you prophesied in the name of the Lord, saying, this house shall be like Shiloh, and the city shall be desolate without an inhabitant? And all the people were gathered against Jeremiah in the house of the Lord. When the princes, so now the princes, the political leaders come into play, when the princes of Judah heard these things, they came up from the king's house to the house of the Lord, and sat down in the entry of the new gate of the Lord's house. So you see, they came out of the king's house, these political leaders. And then, in verse 11, they listened to the priests and prophets, religious leaders, Now please note this very carefully. I want you to understand, brethren, the persecution did not start through the throne of David or the government. The persecution started by the religious leaders who are in touch with the government. And what do they say in verse 11? This is what they say. And the priests and the prophets spoke to the princes and all the people, saying, "This man deserves to die, for he has prophesied against this city, as you have heard with your ears." In other words, brethren, they believed that Jeremiah was committing an act of treason. And then, after this, Jeremiah tells the message, verse 12. Then Jeremiah spoke to all the princes and all the people, saying, "The Lord sent me to prophesy against this house and against this city with all the words that you have heard. Now therefore, amend your ways and your doings, and obey the voice of the Lord your God. Then the Lord will relent concerning the doom that he has pronounced against you. As for me, here I am, in your hand. Do with me as seems good and proper to you, but know for certain that if you put me to death, you will surely bring innocent blood on yourselves, on this city, and on its inhabitants. For truly the Lord has sent me to you to speak all these words in your hearing." So we see that Jeremiah admits that he is God's spokesman. He also told them if they put him to death, they will be responsible. And this is a very pretty bold statement, wouldn't you say? Then verse 16, "So the princes and all the people said to the priests and the prophets, 'This man does not deserve to die, for he has spoken to us in the name of the Lord our God.'" Now, brethren, I want you to notice who changed sides. The people, didn't they? Suddenly, the people now stand for the princes. People are fickle, They were people who think, or may think about us, all kinds of lies, but now they think the opposite. There was back in the 79, when we had the famous receivership, the press was spreading all kinds of lies about us, but many people believed it, but later some of them changed their minds anyway. So, now we have people who all of a sudden sided with the princes or the political leaders of Judah. But now, they were a bit afraid of what the priests and the prophets might do. So they named the story of Micah when the king delivered him. Now Micah is Micah in the days of Hezekiah. Micah said all these things and Hezekiah did nothing. And then there was the story of Uriah. And Uriah prophesied at the very beginning of Jehoiakim's reign, and he fled to Egypt, but Jehoiakim got him, punished him, and executed him. And so the implication is, the politicians didn't want to make an absolute choice. They said, well, here is the man, here is the king to make that decision. You see, they were ambivalent. The princes of the land at this moment were ambivalent. So what happened is what is described in verse 24. But before verse 24, let's see that in verse 17, certain of the elders of the land rose up and spoke to all the assembly of the people, saying, Micah of Moresheth prophesied in the days of Hezekiah king of Judah, and spoke to all the people of Judah, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, Zion shall be plowed like a field, Jerusalem shall become heaps of ruins, and the mountain of the temple like the bare hills of the forest. Did Hezekiah, king of Judah, and all Judah ever put him to death? Did he not fear the Lord and seek the Lord's favor? And the Lord relented concerning the doom which he had pronounced against them. But we are doing great evil against ourselves. You see, as a result of Micah's prophecy, Hezekiah repented. He led a reform, and he was delayed, and finally, it came to pass, coming to pass in the days of Jeremiah. Verse 20. Now there was also a man who prophesied in the name of the Lord, Uriah, the son of Shemaiah of Kiriath Yearim, who prophesied against this city, and against this land according to all the words of Jeremiah. Now it is unknown, brethren, as to whether Uriah was God's prophet or not. Verse 21. And when Jehoiakim the king, with all his mighty men, and all the princes heard these words, the king sought to put him to death. But when Uriah heard it, he was afraid and fled, and he went to Egypt. So you see, Uriah was put on trial and killed for his beliefs. Verse 22, Then Jehoiakim the king sent men to Egypt, Elnathan the son of Achor and other men who went with him to Egypt. And they brought Uriah from Egypt and brought him to Jehoiakim the king, who killed him with the sword and cast his dead body into the graves of the common people. Nevertheless, the hand of Ahikam the son of Shaphan was with Jeremiah, so that they should not give him into the hand of the people to put him to death. So the government, in a sense, sat as a judge and said, well, we can go either way. And at this point, one of the men stood up for Jeremiah and changed the course, so it was decided then in his favor. But the government was ambivalent. You see, the government was not on any side. They was kind of ambivalent, but the problem started with the religious leaders, and the people swung from side to another. Now that's the way they are. And whatever their leaders tell them, they will follow. That's the case even today. Then in chapter 27, we have again the same time of the year, but now please listen carefully. In the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim the son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Thus says the Lord to me, Make yourselves bonds and yokes, and put them on your neck, and send them to the king of Edom, to the king of Moab, to the king of Ammonites, the king of Tyre, the king of Sidon, by the hand of the messengers who came to Jerusalem, to Zedekiah king of Judah. Now, be careful, brethren. There are critics who say that something here is wrong, because this should be a reign of Zedekiah. But what king did we read in verse 1? We read a different king. It's the king Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. So, the thing is that this was the prophecy, and there are critics who say that something here again is wrong, because Zedekiah is mentioned here and not Jehoiakim. But we don't read what kind of thing was wrong, but there is no mistake, That is the prophecy that came at the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, and the time of the fulfillment of that prophecy would come 11 years later. And that he will be, the news, the prophecy was that he will be replaced by his brother, and God pronounced that at the beginning of the older brother's reign, you see. You fashion these things, and these are going to be the symbols, and what the nations round about send messengers to Jerusalem, to Zedekiah. That was the prophecy, brethren, that Zedekiah would succeed his brother and will also be king. Now that was a prophecy that all these things are going indeed to happen. And they did happen. Verse 4, and command them to say to their masters, Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Thus you shall surely, you shall say to your masters, verse 5, I have made the earth, the man, and the beast that are on the ground, by my great power and rule, by my outstretched arm, and have given it to whom it seemed proper to me. And now I have given all these lands, meaning those roundabout lands, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon, my servant, and the beasts of the field I have also given him to serve him. So you see, verse 7, all nations shall serve him, and his son, and his son's son, until the time of his land comes. And then many nations and great kings shall make him serve them. Now, this verse 7 is answer to the problem that appears in the book of Daniel chapter 5, as to who was the Belshazzar, Now, account to this progeny of Nebuchadnezzar ruling on throne. Belshazzar was Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, not his son. The son was away. Belshazzar was ruling in Babylon. Verse 8, and it shall be that the nation and kingdom which will not serve Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and which will not put its neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation I will punish, says the Lord, with sword, the famine, and the pestilence, until I have consumed them by his hand. Verse 9, therefore do not listen to your prophets, your diviners, your dreamers, your soothsayers, or your sorcerers who speak to you, saying, you shall not serve the king of Babylon. Yes, brethren, there are still even people today, of course, who speak similar things. This is the Old Testament, but in the meantime, in the New Testament, we have now new false prophets, doomsayers, sorcerers, etc., etc. Jeremiah calls upon all of them not to listen, all the people not to listen to astrologers. Because, as I said, we might be in danger sometimes not understanding certain things and thinking that we are doing the right thing. We can sometimes make terrible mistakes. And what happened was, these astrologers, these dreamers, sorcerers, they prophesy a lie to you, says God to Jeremiah in verse 10, to remove you far from your land, and I'll drive you out, and you will perish. But the nations that bring their necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, I'll let them remain in their own land, says the Lord, and they shall till it and dwell in it, meaning the land. Then in verse 12, I also spoke to Zedekiah, the king of Judah, according to all these words, saying, bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon, and serve him and his people, and live. Now, this is 11 years later than the prophet spoke to Zedekiah, related to the prophecy God gave him 11 years earlier. God prepared Babylon as a punishment, indeed, so you better not resist. In verse 13 he says, why will you die? Well, why will you die? If you resist the Babylonian king, then you might just die. Most likely you will die. So, therefore do not listen, verse 14, to the words of the prophets who speak to you, saying, you shall not serve the king of Babylon, for they prophesy a lie to you. So we have another blatant lie, brethren. They prophesy, and false prophets always do that. They always prophesy, bad things, or some bad things with so much of bad or with so much of evil. And so therefore we are having, we are having a very balanced plant here. And so, the prophecy is, the prophecy of these false prophets were lies, but what Jeremiah was saying was not a lie. And, why would he die? He says, verse 13. And your young people, by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence, as the Lord has spoken against the nations that will not serve the king of Babylon. Therefore, do not listen to the words of the prophets who speak to you, saying, you shall not serve the king of Babylon, for they prophesy a lie to you. For I have not sent them, says the Lord. Yet they prophesy a lie in my name, that I may drive you out, and that you may perish, you and the prophets who prophesied to you. Verse 16. Also I spoke to the priests and to all the people, saying, Thus says the Lord, do not listen to the words of your prophets who prophesied to you, saying, who prophesy lied to you. Do not listen to them. Do not listen to them. You know, they prophesy lie, and they tell you there'll be freedom and everything will be fine, and nevertheless you're just about to fall into the hands of the next power. And nevertheless, to those who lie, do not listen to them. So, do not listen to them, serve the king of Babylon and live. Why should this city... So, there are prophets there, brethren, just like today. They just prophesy to you, don't do this or do that. But they lie. They lie. Do not listen to them, serve the king of Babylon and live, says verse 17. Why should this city be waste? But if they are prophets, and if the word of the Lord is with them, let them now make intercession to the Lord of hosts, that the vessels which are left in the house of the Lord, in the house of the king of Judah, and in Jerusalem, do not go to Babylon. Do not go to Babylon. That's what God says, do not. And now the last verses of this chapter, brethren, is the prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the temple was going to be destroyed, and of course, the vessels from the temple were to be carried away into captivity. That never happened before, but now it will happen. Verse 19, For thus says the Lord of hosts concerning the pillars, concerning the sea, concerning the carts, and concerning the remainder of the verses or the vessels the remainder of the vessels that remain in this city. With Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, did not take, when he carried away captive Jeconiah, and his Jeconiah was the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. He was carrying captive from Jerusalem to Babylon, and all the nobles of Judah and Jerusalem. Yes, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, concerning the vessels that remain in the house of the Lord, and in this house, and in the house of the king of Judah and of Jerusalem. So yes, he was there. He was seeing these current events affecting the Jewish society, and we could now draw some parallels between our society and the Jewish society. And finally, verse 22 of chapter 27, it says, They shall be carried to Babylon, and there they shall be until the end that I visit them, says the Lord. Then I'll bring them up and restore them to this place, which of course happened after 70 years, when under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah, the remnant of Jews did return, and truly, this whole home that they made, this new home, was really a light to the world, and it was meant to turn people's attention, of course, to turn people's attention so that they would know this prophecy, that they would know that after 70 years, there would be some remnants, led by Ezra and Nehemiah, that would return, and that Judah was going to live at that time in relative prosperity and in harmony, knowing that they, are under one God, and that they're having a godly leadership that really has cleansed them from any traces of Baal worship. In any case, this is read in chapter 26 and chapter 27, and then we'll see in chapter 28 confrontation with false prophet Hananiah, who is confronted over issues and so on. So again, we see that there is no much difference between the age or the world of that time, and even between even between various circumstances that have existed in the ancient house of Judah. So, we finish with chapter 27 today, which the prophecy, verses 19 through 21, is a prophecy of temple being destroyed and vessels being carried into captivity.